Thank you very much. So on that, welcome back, members, and welcome everybody. My name is Gary Crawford. I'm the chair of the Budget Committee. And the clerk, of course, you've just heard, has confirmed that we have quorum, and I do call the meeting to order. Just have to run down a few procedural items before we begin. Today's meeting is being held by video conference, and city staff are connected to the meeting, as well as councillors by video conference. As City Hall remains closed, the public are going to continue to participate electronically and can watch this meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. I do ask for everyone's patience as we will probably have some delays and technical problems as we have been having periodically during the day. I would remind staff to keep their mics muted and the videos turned off. This will make it easier for me as chair to watch those on YouTube and to observe members as they participate in the meeting. Members, can you also make sure that your videos are turned on while we hear the public presentations on the budget? And if there's any visiting councillors who are with us, I would encourage you to also turn on your videos so that we can also see you, as well as the clerk can record your attendance. To begin, are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, we'll move on. Again, welcome everybody. The purpose of tonight's meeting, which is a special meeting of the Budget Committee, is to hear public speakers on the 2021 operating and capital budgets. We have a number of people registered tonight. I believe there's 20 members of the public who have connected to this meeting by phone or computer. The clerk has posted the speakers list online at toronto.ca/council. You can click on the speakers button for today's meeting to see a complete list of names. And for everyone who is going to be speaking tonight, I'll just sort of run down how the process works. You will have 5 minutes to do your deputation or speak to the committee and other councillors if they're on. You may, after your 5 minutes, have some questions by any individual member based on your comments. And just before you hit 5 minutes, if you haven't finished, I'll just give you a little reminder to wrap up your questions around the 5-minute mark. And of course, you can continue listening and stay connected on YouTube if you wish. Also, so the clerk, there are a number of ways that you can reach not only the Budget Committee, but all members and councillors at City Council. Of course, this is one forum, but you can also send emails and communications from yourselves to us. And again, those communications can be sent to buc@toronto.ca. And there'll be any written deputations will be available to members on CMP, which is what's called our clerk's meeting portal. And again, this is your opportunity to speak to us, your concerns, your issues, your comments about the 2021 budget. And we will listen very carefully, very seriously to every comment that you make as we begin our deliberations. Process-wise, we're finishing up public deputations this evening. We'll be meeting as a Budget Committee next week, January 28th and February 4th, for what are called wrap-up meetings. And we will make recommendations as a Budget Committee that will go to full executive and then from there to full council for complete budget deliberations and debate, and that'll be in I believe, mid-February. Any questions, members, on the process? Looks all good. Why don't so let me call up the list and we'll start here. So what I'll do is I'll name the usually about 3 or 4 people, just so you get a sense of when you're going to be coming up. And then I will, again, we'll start the time and you can begin. So the first 3 speakers are Vincent Puhaka, Leah Ashkenas, and William Pham. So again, first speaker, Vincent Puhaka. Are you with us?
I'm here.
Great. You can start whenever you want.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Vincent Puhaka. Councillor Crawford, you got my last name right, and that rarely happens, so I really appreciate that. I'm a resident of Mike Layton's ward and a member of TTC Riders. So you've all heard from me before, and here we go again, down to business. So at TTC Riders, we've been looking through this year's budget through our usual transit lens. You're going to hear something from me that you normally don't. And that's good job. A cautious good job, I'll say, but a good job nonetheless. It's good to see that there's no TTC fare increase this year coming down the pipe, because we all know transit riders shouldn't have to pay the costs of a pandemic beyond anyone's control, especially since so many still need to use the TTC to get to their essential workplaces. And these workplaces just don't pay people enough. So I'm glad to see that. Personally, I'm one of those lucky ones that gets to work from home, but my girlfriend still needs to travel on the bus, and she's back in school and working part-time as well. So I know our finances can't take a fare hike, especially when I have to go back to the office, and I don't think I'm alone in that. So you've heard the good. Now it's time for, I guess, the bad, or the things that we disagree with. So honestly, what's with TTC service levels? Crowding is back in a big way, especially in the suburbs where essential workers tend to live and work. My mom and dad live out in Jennifer McKelvey's ward, and they can report a fair amount of crowding on buses like the 54 Lawrence East. And instead of throwing as many buses on the road as we can, there's almost a 4% reduction in service hours planned from 2020 levels. Not huge, to be fair, and it was an operating shortfall in dollars for 2021. But we need to do everything we can to ensure that service increases in the short term are implemented, and that future shortfalls hopefully don't fall on riders with fare increases, because we don't know what's going to happen to the federal and provincial supports in 2021, the COVID supports. So in previous years here, I've heard myself and others rant just ad nauseum about how the property tax here in Toronto is too low, it's the lowest in the region, and holding to at inflation increases is unsustainable, so on and so forth. You know what? To head off any questions I'm sure to get, such as, what would you do in this situation? I just want to say, I get it. The cost of living in this city is insane. And especially given the violence south of the border, we don't want to have our elected representatives taking the brunt of anger at some of these things against tax increases. It's also not that great to have all our eggs as a city in one basket, and perhaps homeowners alone don't need to bear the brunt of funding this city and keeping things like bus service levels going and enhancing transit service into the future. So why don't we, and I'm sure you know what I'm going to be mentioning here, but why don't we lean on other revenue tools? We all know about the ones currently allowed in the City of Toronto Act. You know, we could possibly bring back the vehicle registration tax, for example. But even if that's not palatable, because again, it's not an easy time, and I get it. Why not ask the province for the right to levy things like a sales deputation, or even better, something like a progressive personal income tax? Both the sales tax and local income taxes are used in the tax-hating United States. Every municipality in Indiana uses one, for example, and Mike Pence used to run that place for Pete's sake. So why can't we try that here? The point of my deputation is not to list possible revenue tools. Everything I've mentioned has been studied by city staff at some point, but to try to hammer home to you that recovery from COVID is going to cost money. Good cities that people want to live in cost money to run well. Cities that are socially just for poor and working people cost money to run well as well. And we're fooling ourselves if we think that Toronto, for lack of a better word. So with those thoughts, and with an earnest request to increase transit service instead of a 4% reduction, I want to thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions that you might have. We're under 5 minutes. That's good.
That's great. Thank you. Councillor Carroll, ask questions.
Thank you. I do want to ask questions. The budget chief won't be surprised that I have questions. I'm always happy to have a conversation.
I was just waiting for them.
When someone raises the idea of an income-based or a sales tax-based source of revenue for the city, I don't know if you're aware, we're hitting a population of 3 million right about now, which now makes us the only city of our size that doesn't have either a sales tax or an income tax in the world that I know of. I keep looking. The question I want to ask you about it, though, is thank you for coming and telling us that you want it. But for us to go and ask the province, they have to be clear that residents are ready for it, that they'd like to keep their property tax stable during a difficult time like this, but they need this additional source of revenue. Have you had this conversation in your community? Have you had it with neighbors and family? And what's the uptick?
So, you know what, I wasn't doing university level statistical research and polling on the issue. So obviously I can't report that. But what I can say is these are discussions that I have with my family and friends all the time. Well, a lot of us are, city politics nerds, but even like my extended family are not city politics nerds. They're just regular people. And in our conversations, I'll always tell them, like my uncle, my mom, my dad, that, look, you're homeowners. You don't want your property tax to go up. But they're always complaining. Well, how come I'd love to take the bus, but it's crowded. Or how come the community center's hours aren't what I want them to be? How come these programs aren't offered? And we kind of have in our society this weird idea where people want the services, but have been told that like taxes are bad. So, as always, none of us want to pay more taxes. So why don't we spread it among different populations, right? So maybe we don't want to be leaning on the property tax. You pay a lot in that. It's the average property tax of what, $3,000 now? It's a lot of money. So an income tax, property tax, possibly a sales tax, all these things, I think they play well around our dinner table if they're explained as a way of evening out the tax burden across the entire city so that everyone pays to making sure our city is strong. That's just my family, right? That's not representative, but it is what it is.
Right. No, I think it may be representative, and it may be that they're not aware that they might not be the most avid online shoppers, but people who've remained employed during the pandemic have kept right on spending online, and the city captures none of that. We could be, if we were getting a penny of each of those dollars, putting it into helping revive the on-the-ground retail trade that has been so devastated. But what you're saying is, in your family, that sounds not. It does sound typical. That they still need it explained a bit. So would you, as you can imagine, it's a tall ask this year. The budget is likely going to not see a lot of change. We know where the hot spots are as a result of the deputations over the last couple of days, but there won't be a big change to the revenue streams. Would you suggest that if it sounds like they need more explanation, we need to start having the conversation now so that it could be a reality by the next time we're at the budget table?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, all of us sitting here know that something like a sales tax isn't going to happen for this budget. It's just not going to.
Yeah.
We have the budget we have. And honestly, like I said, it's not a terrible budget, actually. Like a TTC riders will always come and complain at you guys. It's not a terrible budget. This, like, for the transit service is staying pretty constant. We just need more. So we have to start having that conversation as a city.
Right.
And it's a tall ask, you're right, to our citizens, our fellow Torontonians. It's a tall ask to the province. But if we can demonstrate the people of Toronto are behind it, maybe the province lets it happen. Even if they don't, you have to try.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you so much for spelling that out for us. You bet.
Thank you. Next speaker is Leah Ashkenaz.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Leah. Go ahead. You got 5 minutes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Leah Ashkenaz, and today I will be speaking on behalf of Earl Hague Secondary School's Eco Council. I am here in part to thank you. In September 2019, students from all over the city congregated at Queen's Park to strike for climate action. We chanted and marched with homemade signs telling you, in Greta Thunberg's words, "Our house is on fire." Shortly after this call to action, Toronto declared a climate emergency. In this decision, the city committed itself to, quote, protecting our economy, our ecosystems, and our community from climate change, end quote. One aspect of that goal is the city's commitment to achieving a circular economy, outlined in Transform TO's 2019 implementation update. A circular economy is a system where every raw material we use gets put back into the supply chain. This means we would stop extracting and using such large quantities of raw material, which require oil and energy to produce. Unfortunately, this goal of achieving a circular economy has taken a hit due to the pandemic. From takeout containers to medical masks, we are using more single-use products than ever. In a non-scientific poll I conducted on Instagram, about 3/4 of Earl Hague students said they have used more single-use plastics since lockdown started in March. But this is not just our opinion. This is a global issue. The International Solid Waste Association has estimated that consumption of single-use plastic has increased by 250 to 300% during the pandemic. And according to the Toronto Star, Ontario reported that residential waste was up the equivalent of, quote, more than 600 full garbage trucks in just 1 month, end quote. We need to recommit to our goal of reducing city waste 70% by 2026, as outlined in Toronto's long-term waste management strategy. This deadline is only 5 years from now, and it doesn't feel so long-term anymore. Thank you for your time.
Much for your deputation.
Thank you.
Oh, Councillor Layton has a question. Go ahead, Mike.
Leah, thank you so much for coming out this evening. $2.5 million.
Yes.
So that's how much we are not funding our climate plan compared to what we thought we would this year.
Yeah, 17% decrease.
Now, 70% sounds huge, but we got like a $13 billion budget. Quickly, what's 2.5 million in a $13 billion budget? Yeah, it's pretty small, is the answer. We should be acting like our house is on fire, right? Like that's Greta's words.
Yes.
I think I was at that rally.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think by reducing our budget, despite the hard times, like don't get me wrong, our budget has hard times, and there's a lot of stuff we could be spending on, but reducing the budget and using an excuse like we're not ready to spend the money yet, do you think that's a good excuse? Do you think you and your friends and your generation are going to look back at that and say something good about us?
I don't think so. I think that we should deliver on the commitments that we made pre-pandemic, the commitments to the environment and the environmental emergency that we're living in right now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. William Pham is next. William, are you there? William was also. Hi, William. Can you hear us or hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Sorry, just give me a second because it's on the microphone.
Hello. Sorry, I'm having issues on my end.
Did you want to? We could put you on hold for a few minutes while you.
Is it better now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Now it's good. So.
Okay. Good evening. My name is William Pham, and I'm speaking on behalf of Earl Hague Secondary School Student Activity Council in Ward 18. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, youth in my school community have been taking great measures to stop the spread, as many of city councils have said, right? And we've done this by staying at home, physically distancing, and wearing masks at all times when we were at school. We also recognize how crucial lockdown measures have been in protecting those who are most vulnerable. And we praise the city's efforts in the upcoming budget to allocate more resources to Toronto Public Health to aid in the fight against COVID-19. While directly tackling COVID-19 remains of utmost priority, we also want to stress the need to increase mental health support, especially for youth. According to data from the Canadian government, youth have experienced the largest mental health declines out of any demographic. Since the onset of the pandemic, youth nationwide have reported higher anxiety and stress due to schooling and the fear of losing employment. These rates are especially impactful in my own school community at Earl Hague, where over 75% of students are visible minorities. Visible minority youth disproportionately report higher anxiety and stress levels when compared to their white counterparts. At Earl Hague, in a social media poll, 75% of students reported that their mental health has declined during this pandemic, and 53% of students reported that they don't feel like there's enough and adequate mental health resources available to them. This is proportionally higher than the results provided by the Canadian government. Personally, as a grade 11 student, I often get anxious thinking about the prospect of university because I feel like I'm not equipped enough with enough knowledge to move on into the future. And this is not just the case for me, but also for those graduating this year and those in my grade. The thought of whether they've learned enough and whether or not they're ready for the future ahead. And trust me, it keeps me awake and it keeps all of us awake at night, every single night. I am very fortunate to have access to resources that allow me to communicate with friends and access online mental health resources. But for many in the city and many in my community, this may not be the case. It's quite clear that youth are facing issues of mental health, and action must be taken to ensure the well-being of our community, especially here in my own community of Earl Hague. In the 2020 budget, over $111 million were allocated to family services, which includes youth mental health services within Toronto Public Health. However, this year's budget only allocates around $109 million. That's a decrease of around $2 million in funding to resources that are desperately needed during this pandemic. Youth need access to more mental health services, and they must be easier to access. And it's not just youth mental health services. It's also funding towards programs that can reduce stress and make it easier for us to find the help that we need. This year's budget allocates funding to 2 new youth hubs. Yay! But it doesn't mention anything about extending the hours of existing hubs or introducing more online opportunities to connect and engage with youth. It's startling that some youth hubs in the city close at 5:30 p.m., closing before we have the opportunity to use these services. As we continue to recover from the pandemic, it's very important that we have a recovery that is just, equitable, and proactive. If left unchecked, we could possibly deal with a mental health crisis among our youth that can have detrimental impacts to our schools, our communities, and as many on this committee love and I'm sure are infatuated by, the economy. Youth are the future, and the city must take proactive steps in ensuring that the needs of youth in my school community at Earl Hague and across Toronto are adequately met. Thank you.
Very much, Councillor. Carol has a question for you.
Yes, thank you for coming tonight and raising the issue of youth mental health. We've heard the stats. We share your concern, and you know you're living it. We hear that people are worried that all lockdowns are not alike. People in line for scholarships are now wondering if they're still in line for scholarships. If another area is not locked down, do they leapfrog over you and get ahead in that queue? All sorts of stresses. In terms of the youth hubs, though, and youth services, the same department that we're relying on to do all of this mental health reform that's associated with taking things away from police, we're meant to be in a youth services review right now because we want to evaluate the youth hubs and make sure that they can be effective. How are they staffed? How are they funded? Do they match the hours of youth? All those things are supposed to be being reviewed, but that seems to be moving at a very slow pace in order to do all this other work. Would you like to see more funds going to it so that perhaps they had enough staff to be doing both things?
Of course, yes.
Okay. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, William, for coming. Next 3 speakers are Muna Ali, Michael Manu, and Laura Harper. So we'll begin with Muna Ali. Muna, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Good evening. I just listened to William. the topic is very pertinent to what I'm talking about too. I'm also going to be addressing youth mental health, but from a youth worker's perspective. So my name is Muna, and I'm a youth worker at the neighborhood group in downtown East, which is in Ward 11. And I'm just gonna really just add to William, hopefully not taking anything away from him, but definitely the last 10 months, I've seen firsthand the need for youth to receive youth mental health supports within a community-driven approach that is culturally relevant, easy, free, and accessible. And I've come across many young people like William who have been experiencing depression, anxiety, stress, and isolation. And we know that mental health is at the forefront during the COVID pandemic. But I would just like to just add, it was also highlighted in the City of Toronto's report called Community Voices Pave the Road to Recovery that was released last fall. The report summarized the voices of over 1,457 people from Indigenous equity-seeking groups and vulnerable populations. 70% of respondents said that they felt sad, anxious, overwhelmed, or lonely, and we can only imagine how many of those were young people. And the report recommends the city invest in services, programs, and community to improve equity so Toronto becomes a more livable city for all its residents. And a bottom-up model of engagement with those who have lived expertise and intergovernmental collaboration between all three levels of government is also recommended. But as we can see, the 2021 operating budget does not meet the moment. It does not meet the challenges our city faces in dealing with youth mental health. For example, in the operating budget, Toronto Parks and Recreation is $455 million. That is a 1.5% cut from last year. And that's a decrease of $7.1 million. I believe this is wrong and short-sighted, and most importantly, it has the potential of failing our young people. It is clear that this budget doesn't address the needs of many Torontonians, especially youth who rely on their nearby community recreational centers and other city facilities, course parks for social and physical activities, which are crucial to maintaining their mental well-being. This council has to prioritize mental health for all its residents, but especially vulnerable populations that include youth who are marginalized, low income, who live in neighborhood improvement areas, and who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Not only should City Council restore Parks and Recreation funding to 2020 levels, it should invest in youth mental health services and programs in the community. There are currently well-established programs funded by the City of Toronto, including Stella's Place, a community healing project, to name a few. This is exactly the kind of community approach to service delivery that is both culturally appropriate and sustainable. In the areas of mental health, again, the city report recommends providing more funding to expand health services to reduce waiting lists. Increase recreational fitness outdoor opportunities as a key component to supporting positive mental health and well-being. Increase information outreach and publicity for mental health programs. In conclusion, this budget does not make the investments needed to address the problems facing our city. Thank you, and I can take questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Muna. Seeing no questions, I appreciate coming out tonight.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Next is Michael Manu from Toronto Youth Cabinet. Welcome, Michael. Is Michael?
Hello?
Hi, Michael. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I was just checking to see if I was on, so it looks like I'm good to go.
You're good to go whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Budget Committee members. My name is Michael Manu, and I'm the Executive Director of the Toronto Youth Cabinet, which is the official youth advisory body to the City of Toronto. Once again, it has been a quick turnaround since the budget launched 12 days ago, and we've been working hard to try to understand the budget and communicate this information to our members. You've already heard from our great budget lead, Eli, and I know William was speaking on behalf of the school group, but William's also part of the TYC, and they've provided some strong recommendations for this year's budget. So I just would like to continue with some of these concerns. Last year, I started my deputation addressing the lack of information we have for the city's progress on the poverty reduction strategy. And we believe that it was a mistake in a normal year that we didn't have that information to be able to make informed decisions on how to support our most vulnerable populations. And so as you see with COVID-19, the gap has just continued to widen. Let me be very clear. I think that the situation that we will not be heading into our city's most pivotal budget without this crucial information is a major disappointment. On that, we are also concerned about the lack of transparency on other major budget considerations, such as the future of the Gardner East expansion, the lack of funding for our city's state of good repair backlog, and our city's approach to community safety. With a budget that already lacks public input before this jam-packed 10 to 12-day period, we believe that the public should be given the opportunity to at least consider all this relevant information. How can we have confidence in the direction of our city as we recover from the pandemic without this? This will be my last budget to review as the ED of the TYC because I'll be aging out. And so I'm going to take this time to lay out how I think this process needs to be adjusted for the public's best interest. Firstly, we believe that the city needs to expedite the process to include capital budget items and changes to go through the equity lens process and the full scope of that. The city cannot truly commit to equity without clearly demonstrating what the impact of delaying investment in important community assets is while we trudge forward investing in projects like the Gardner East rebuild, which we at this point don't believe to be the best value of our money right now. A lot of focus naturally is on the operating budget at this time, but if we continue to find ourselves in a situation where funding for capital budget continues to fall short of requirements, the public will need to understand and provide input on the trade-offs for these decisions, and we'll have to make those decisions with that information out there. Secondly, we need to seriously question our lack of investment in youth and community relative to the police budget. Yes, the police budget has not increased, but questions need to be asked about addressing the roots of violence and crisis, as the community raised valiantly and loudly over the summer. If this budget does not properly address issues raised in the poverty reduction strategy, immediate steps to address gun violence, and other strategies Council has already approved through tangible funding, we will simply continue the cycle of dealing with the crisis once it gets out of hand and looking for money from the province or the federal government to fix these issues that we believe we have the means to address as a city right now. Finally, it is clear that our city needs to have a proper long-term financial plan, and I know Eli touched on this yesterday. Since the end of last term of council, there has been no development on this. The situation has drastically changed, and we're moving forward in the recovery of the pandemic. It just seems intuitive that we chart a course to address our city's needs, not just in the interim, but for years and generations to come. Every year, the community asks this committee and council to be bold and make bold choices and decisions, not just for this year in question, but also for future years and for the next generation. This pandemic stands to be one of those large events that will force the hand of council to make these decisions. Major shifts like the 2008 financial crisis, like 9/11, and other major worldwide events in history have caused other people to make these big choices. Right now, it's in your hands to make the decisions that set us on the right course. Thank you very much.
Much for your deputation. Councillor Carroll has a question or two.
Well, really just one, Michael. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and especially given I didn't know you were going to be aging out. That's the one flaw in the youth cabinet model. But I just wanted to know where you're leaving it, because I know that past youth cabinet executive, dating back to, I can remember doing this not before the 2018 election, but before the 2014 election. I was in a panel where the youth cabinet came to speak to myself and the city manager at the time, Joe Penichetti, to say, we want you to do a broad citywide budget consultation before you draft a budget. Come and speak to us, even if it was just at the beginning of a term of office. Is that still an idea that continues to float around in the youth cabinet?
Yeah, definitely. The only people really on our group that have got a chance to be involved in that process are Eli, because in his role, he was part of the equity budgeting panel. And I was also the budget lead. I was also the budget lead for a year. And so I got the opportunity to do that. But yeah, we definitely believe that young people and everybody should have the chance to air out these concerns. And if there was a long-term financial plan that comes out of a meeting like that at the beginning of term, that would also be the right way to go about it.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank
you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next, we have Laura Harper, Concord Community Services Association. Laura, are you with us?
Yep, I'm here.
Great.
Yeah, I have a daughter from JK in the background, so just don't mind the background noise. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak tonight with you. My name's Laura Harper, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Scarborough Civic Action Network, or SCAN, which is a nonpartisan network that aims to address inequities across Scarborough through civic engagement. Through widespread engagement with communities across Scarborough, SCAN has learned that for the 4th year in a row, Scarborough residents have identified affordable housing for tenants as the top priority issue. Over 35% of Scarborough's near 216,000 households are tenants, which amounts to about 220,000 people, over 1/3 of Scarborough's population. According to the most recent data, more than 44% of tenants in Scarborough spend more than 1/3 of their income on their housing costs. And these are people who live in private or market rental housing. Prior to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, over many years, numerous Scarborough tenants have shared stories about landlords of private rental housing evicting tenants in order to command higher rents. We have heard numerous stories about the increase of rent evictions and landlords' own use evictions. We have heard about tenants being illegally evicted from single-family home rentals, so landlords can turn the houses into rooming houses. We've heard about market rents and high rises being increased without any justification. Scarborough tenants have shared that landlords use unethical means to intimidate them, and in some cases, landlords threaten eviction or hand out collection notices, even in the cases where the rent has been paid on time. When long-standing tenants are evicted, landlords are able to rent the same unit at a significantly higher cost, and in some cases, double the rent of the previous tenant. Not only does this leave long-standing tenants vulnerable, but it also threatens the supply of what little affordable housing we have left in the city. Within the COVID-19 pandemic, we know many low to moderate tenants in Scarborough are facing even more complex hardships. People have lost income, evictions have occurred or are looming, rents have gone up, and more so, this is all alongside anxieties and fears with the pandemic. At AXA, my day job, we hear about these struggles on a daily basis. Our food bank numbers continue to increase as people just don't have enough income for food after paying for housing in this city. As you can imagine, tenants are facing considerable stress owing to the pandemic and lockdown measures. Tenants losing their homes should not be an added stress. Indeed, you can't stay at home if you don't have a home to go to. The city needs to do what it can to help protect the current supply of affordable private rental housing by ensuring that landlords are compliant with laws and that tenants' rights are protected. Based on what we're hearing from residents, we know more needs to be done to ensure landlords are compliant with the laws and that tenants are not subject to abuse. Adequately funding and enforcing programs like Rent Safe TO is absolutely vital. Tenants also need more supports about their rights and how to exercise those rights, and the city needs to invest in programs and organizations that do this work. City programs like the Tenant Defense Fund are vital, especially for vulnerable community members such as racialized communities, immigrants, and seniors. We also need more advocacy efforts for tenants. The reality is that for many, if not most, tenants cannot easily navigate our complex and daunting systems on their own, and they need support. In addition, information resources like Renter Help, which provides guidance for tenants and landlords on rental housing in the City of Toronto, are useful, but they need to be available in multiple languages that reflect the diversity of the city's population. Equity, using an equity lens means ensuring people can access information without barriers. Finally, we also need to ensure all tenants know about the tools available to support them when dealing with landlords that could be abusive. Oftentimes, tenants do not know about services and tools available to them for dealing with housing problems. And to help ensure tenants do have access to resources to support them, the city can support or continue to work in partnership with community serving agencies and grassroots groups who have this regular and ongoing connections with communities. This is something that we feel needs to be done during the pandemic and beyond, with a focus on those most marginalized in our community. As you decide the city budget for 2021, we urge you to ensure supports for vulnerable renters in the city and that they are prioritized. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Very much. I think we have a question from Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation today. After like we've got this provincial ban on evictions, which is kind of fake. It's a ban on enforcing evictions. We're expecting that after that's lifted, which is probably pretty soon, that we're going to see a significant increase in the number of evictions. And Councillor Carroll has pointed this out many times. The actual impact of the pandemic, of the recession that will result from the pandemic, will be an echo. So like months into the future. Do you see anything in this budget that's going to address going to ensure that we're putting resources into keeping people in their homes?
I'd say, like, in terms of the continued funding of the programs that I spoke to, but I think similar to other deputations, it would be great to see more, right? In terms of what else can we do? Because we don't have enough, right? In my presentation, I talked about just maintaining our affordable housing stock, but we know it's not enough. So I'd ask, what other levers can we use? What else can we push to increase that affordable housing stock? And I'll have to get back to Scan and get back to you with other ideas on that. Use the committee as a backup for leaving it at that.
Sure, and I'll thank you. We have the right to ask rhetorical questions or leading
I love
questions, or in fact, no questions at all on occasion. So thank you for your presentation.
And Councillor Layton, you're pretty good at it too. So the next three speakers, Tanya Gill, Abigail Doris, and Sam Burton. Tanya, welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you wonderfully whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm a professional musician and a mother who's very concerned about climate change. So today I'm really focused on climate change. I'm concerned for my child, for all children, especially vulnerable children now and into the future. So I just want to talk a little bit to remind us all about the urgency of climate change and then talk about budget implications. So just to start with, as we know, global average annual temperatures are now 1.1 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average and rising. Youth climate activists, including my son, who spoke at the rally mentioned earlier in 2019, and some other kids I know worldwide have adopted the slogan, "Fight for 1.5. They know that we are currently heading to 3 or 4 degrees warming within this century without making changes, and it would create an unlivable planet within their lifetimes. If humanity succeeds in holding warming to about 1.5 degrees Celsius, things will still be bad. Forest fires will be worse than we've already seen in California and BC, Australia, the Amazon, Siberia. In coming decades, there'll be huge numbers of climate migrants from areas that no longer have water stability or viable farming. Upwards of 1 billion people depend on water systems from disappearing Himalayan glaciers. Coral reefs will be mostly dead, and ocean acidification will kill a significant part of ocean life. With every decimal point above 1.5, it gets significantly worse. And natural feedback loops that increase warming may make it nearly impossible to stop warming, and humans may go extinct. The IPCC, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, said in its landmark 2018 report that the only possibility of stopping warming at 1.5 degrees in their model pathways, the only ones that included a possibility of warming stopping at 1.5 degrees, include a first step of global reduction in CO2 emissions of 45% by 2030. And then we have to get to net zero by 2050, and then we still have to take CO2 out of the air. But without the first step of cutting emissions by about half by 2030, there's no possibility of holding warming to 1.5 degrees. The window closes. We have 9 years. These next 5 years will make or break that possibility. We are in a serious emergency, much more serious than COVID, even though COVID presents a very serious challenge, of course. So cities have a large role to play, and Toronto has made a good start with Transform TO. I am asking the budget committee to put more funds toward tackling climate change. Firstly, I'm asking that you don't cut the Environment and Energy Division budget by 17% from what was planned for 2021. Put that 2.5 million back in and ensure that the city delivers its delayed climate emergency commitments. Toronto should stop spending billions endlessly rebuilding and patching the Gardiner. Should shift money to transit and active transportation infrastructure that advance equity, health, and climate resilience. I personally really appreciate the Bloor West bike lanes. We use them all the time. The ravine strategy must be funded. We should shift some spending from law enforcement to housing, health, and crime prevention programs that advance the equity, health, and resilience of vulnerable communities. I also ask the city to work with other levels of government to increase ambition in climate policies in general. Again, this is an emergency. The current provincial government in particular does not get it, it seems. At the municipal level, we need to fight against development in ecologically sensitive and culturally important areas previously protected by conservation authorities. With regard to Transform TO, I, as a homeowner, do not understand how to retrofit my house to make it carbon neutral. What is the alternative heat source I should use? How does one finance nitpicky installation problems with an old small house? The plans in Transform TO need to be widely communicated to residents of the city. And then with regards to revenue streams, I do own a small house that I bought in 2012. My husband and I are both musicians with lower than average income, but we're, we try to be responsible. I want you to increase my property taxes. And I know many people who feel property taxes are a very good source of revenue. Also, compared to renters, homeowners have made a ridiculous, I would say, unfair profit in the current housing market. And I think this should be taxed and shared back to the community. So I actually support capital gains tax on primary residential properties.
We'll have to wrap up, please.
Okay. I support the commercial parking levy and the vehicle registration tax. I'm asking you to apply a robust climate, health, anti-racist, and equity lens to all major spending decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, appreciate your time with us today, Tanya. Next is Abigail Doris.
Hello.
Abigail. Hi, Abigail.
Hi.
You have.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Great. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you. Good evening, committee members and city staff. Like many other folks, I am trying my best to support school-age children with their virtual learning during the day, so I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Abigail Doris. I'm a registered early childhood educator and the executive coordinator of the Toronto Community for Better Childcare. We are a member-based organization comprising nonprofit early learning and childcare centers, community groups, and individuals who collectively provide care for more than 20,000 Torontonian families. As you all know, this pandemic has had a disproportionate effect on women and racialized communities. This is true for the childcare sector on both fronts, as we are a highly feminized and racialized workforce who provide vital early learning and care for Toronto's most marginalized and vulnerable communities. I had originally planned to overview our written submission today, and I do still encourage you to read it as it was developed in consultation with the childcare community, our allies, and partners. But instead, I want to take this opportunity to share what I'm hearing from the childcare community in their own words. So this morning you heard Amy O'Neill bravely share the funding issues her center is facing, and this is true for the other 700 nonprofit childcare centers in Toronto. Without intense government support, continued emergency financing, stable ongoing base funding, and changes to the fee subsidy system, Toronto's childcare sector isn't going to make it. From centers in Eglinton, Lawrence, and Scarborough Southwest, I have heard, and I quote, "Without sustainability funding, our centers will be forced to close within the next 5 months, if not sooner." From a Don Valley North Child Care Center, I heard, and I quote, "The families we work with have been serving Toronto throughout the pandemic as first responders, as grocery store clerks, and personal support workers. They depend on childcare, and we all depend on them." From a collaborative letter written to Toronto MPPs and the Ministry of Education, written by ECEs from University Rosedale, Willowdale, Toronto Centre, and Spadina Fort York, I heard, and I quote, "This pandemic has brought to light just how much childcare is undervalued by our government. We are here every day working to support and protect your children. Please recognize and protect us." And from York Southweston, last Monday, a childcare educator died from COVID-19. She was a beloved community member and provided dedicated early learning and care in Toronto for 24 years. This loss is devastating to our community and the children and families we work with. We are begging you to push the provincial government for pandemic pay for ECEs and childcare workers and for provincially funded paid sick leave for everyone. It will literally save lives. From every ward I have heard, we know that families are being evicted and losing their job security at increasing rates. We ask that you revise and update phase 2 of the Toronto Licensed Childcare Growth Strategy, and we ask that you reimagine Toronto's childcare fee subsidy system by increasing access to fee subsidies to address inequitable access for part-time and precarious workers, racialized families, and the communities most affected by the pandemic. Councillors, in this moment, in this year, we have an opportunity to change this narrative. It's a time to transform how we view childcare to a vision of collective care, of community care. As an educator, it's my responsibility to advocate for children and families and their right to access education and care. So today, I'm putting into practice a lesson that I have taught countless preschoolers for over a decade, that when you see an injustice, you speak up and you ask for help. Counselors, I am here to ask you to help the childcare community. If the 2021 city budget doesn't have sustainability funding for childcare centers and prioritize accessibility and affordability for families, it doesn't build back a better Toronto. Everyone in Toronto depends on someone who depends on childcare. So building back a better Toronto means raising the value we place on care work and prioritizing communities in their ability to care for each other. I thank you for your time, and I thank you in advance for championing for childcare. I look forward to seeing the actions that you take. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. I think Councillor Carroll has a question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for coming. I think we all do remember Amy's speech this morning, because she put it into really practical terms. You know, a center that's used to having 100 children is trying to stay afloat with only 35, and so on and so forth. I'm not optimistic that we can make major change in this budget this year. If that were coming, we probably would be joined by so many more councillors who aren't on the budget committee tonight to hear this, and I not seeing them here. I don't know that they're writing motions right this minute. But at the very least, should we make sure that if we made sure that the childcare budget was not reduced in size or scope, that we left the monies there, even though all the children aren't going to the childcare every day. You talked about making the center sustainable. If we let that sum of money there, added it back in, would it be best to just make it a sustainability fund to fill those gaps, so that centers that only have the children of frontline workers in them right now, and they're therefore having trouble just keeping the lights on and paying the rent, it just sustains them until all of the full fee paying parents come back? Would that be the least we could do right now? Oh, she may have disconnected.
Absolutely. Sustainability is so incredibly important. I apologize. My internet is very unstable at the moment, and it's also bedtime for 4 children. Absolutely. Sustainability funding is where we need to start, for sure. We absolutely need more than that to ensure that we can continue to support families and support especially working moms and working caregivers so that they can continue to participate in the workforce.
Right.
Any dollar that we can keep in the childcare budget is incredibly valuable, not only to our community, but to all Toronto communities. So absolutely, stabilization funding is key.
And thank you for mentioning the workers, because Mayor Tory really does speak for all of us when he says on TV every day that he wants to see sick pay and the pandemic pay going to far more people being defined as essential. And certainly childcare is essential right now for those workers that need those centers to stay open. Thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Sam Burton. Sam Burton.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Burton, and I'm a resident in Ward 20, your ward, Councillor Crawford. I have a family member living with mental illness. She's had encounters with police many times while in the midst of a crisis. In these moments, sometimes she encountered police by chance. Sometimes strangers called the police. We, her family, have also been forced to call the police, even though we feared for her safety, because there is no one else to call. My family member's experiences are not unlike Regis Kerchinsky-Paquette, who was suffering a mental health crisis and died while police were present. Her experiences are not unlike Chantal Moore, who was shot and killed by police while they were performing a wellness check. The only difference between the experiences of my family member and the experiences of Regis Kerchinsky-Paquette, Chantal Moore, and so many other Black and Indigenous people living with mental illness is that my family member looks white and she is still alive. This is not an accident. This is by design. Policing in Canada is built on racist foundations, and racism is systemic in the institution. It can and must be abolished. As the Budget Committee and City Councillors, you have the power to start change now. So I'm here to call on you to respond to the demands of Black Lives Matter Canada by defunding the Toronto Police by at least 50% and reallocating those funds to community supports and services in order to create safer and more secure societies for all of us, and to rid Black and Indigenous communities of a serious threat to their safety. Such cuts would not be arbitrary, as you called it last June, Councillor Crawford. Taking money from a service that is not only failing to meet its objective to protect all Torontonians, but is in fact actively harming people, and instead investing those funds in building the kinds of alternative systems that community members are asking for, would be anything but arbitrary. It would be a deliberate and sound decision. As the Toronto Police Service's own presentation to you last week outlined, calls to the police from persons in crisis or experiencing an overdose continue to increase. I know that the current police budget includes an expansion of the police's mobile crisis intervention team, but that is the wrong response to the crisis that we're facing. Police should not be involved in responding to people experiencing mental health crises at all, nor should they be in our schools or on public transit. The proposed pilot project to create 4 community crisis intervention teams is a start, but to invest over $1 billion in the police force, again, with one hand, while handing a pilot like this one spare change in comparison, is hypocritical. Defunding the police would free up far more resources to put into the kinds of community-based services that Toronto residents are calling for and that we need right now. It's time for Toronto to defund the police and invest those funds in actually creating safety and security in our city and in answering the demands and needs of Black, Indigenous, racialized, impoverished, and other targeted communities. This is our opportunity to change course. With this budget, we can choose, you can choose, to stop pouring money into a broken and deadly system and to instead channel those resources into systems and supports that work, that serve people's needs, that actually make people safe. I and many others have told you very clearly what choice we want you to make. We want you to defund the police by at least 50% right now. We're watching closely to see if you have the courage and commitment to a safe Toronto for all by making that choice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your deputation. Seeing no questions, we'll go on to the next, John Harris. Welcome, John.
Yes. Yep, I'm here.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you great. Start whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. My name is John Harris, and I am a unit owner in Scarborough in Ward 24 at 262830 Livingston Road. And I'm representing the Condominium Corporation MTCC 1130 in a matter of the bluffs erosion that's ongoing. The point of this deputation is to request that the Condominium Corporation MTCC 1130 be provided with any possible financial support from the 2021 City of Toronto capital budget to assist the corporation in arresting the ever-increasing loss of crest line on the Scarborough Bluffs, which will eventually provide a loss of safety to the existing essential structures on the property. If this erosion is left unabated, it will eventually provide a challenge to other property owners in the area to the north of our location. A bit of background, the property's 2830 Livingston Road is a residential property. It is located along 307 meters, Scarborough Bluffs. Many years ago, the TRCA provided fortification along the shoreline directly below our property with the intent of stopping wave erosion by the lake. This action was successfully completed and the erosion at the toe of the bluffs appears to have arrested. Since 2010-2011, MTCC 1130 has been working closely with the TRCA on a fee-for-services basis in the development of slope crest remediation plans. During this time, MTCC 1130 has spent approximately $214,000 on the development of geotechnical surveys, plans, recommendations, and a partial slope remediation is guided by the TRCA. Partial bluff remediation that was completed in 2015 has been successful. Currently, the TRCA is focused on other high priority issues, which has put them in the position of potentially not being able to continue working with us until the end of 2021 or into 2022. TRCA has stated that as of December 16th, that based on funding parameters, our property would not be eligible for assistance under the TRCA's erosion risk management program unless authorized or guided by their funding partners. In addition, there's been an unanticipated higher rate of erosion on certain parts of the property, particularly the area at the south end, which is created a situation where we have some great concerns regarding the stability of some of the amenities on the property due to their close proximity to the eroding cliff face. We approached the TRCA and the City of Toronto Building Group to seek direction on how we should react to our concerns. We were advised by the TRCA on December 16, 2020, that it would be prudent for MTCC 1130 to complete a value engineering assessment of the amenities within the hazard area to determine whether relocation or decommissioning of some of these structures would outweigh stabilization work with structures in their current locations. We are following the advice of the authority by approaching a multiple number of geotechnical engineers that have worked for the TRCA in the past to provide us with appropriate quotations for these required studies. We anticipate the resultant studies will be potentially expensive to the corporation. In 2012, the TRCA provided a commissioned report on September 7, 2012, and the report was to suggest how to remediate the slopes. And the cost at that particular time, in 2012, was estimated at $3.9 million before taxes in 2012 dollars. We would only assume that in today's dollars, the sum might have increased to some degree. We are not in a position at this moment to know what that current costing may be. We do not have the financial resources to privately fund this required bluff race remediation. Hence, I requested the City of Toronto in financing or potentially working with the province of Ontario in terms of providing more funding for this type of activity.
We'll have to wrap
We're
up,
currently
sir.
working. Okay, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from members? I do appreciate you coming, John. I know I will suggest maybe reaching out to my office in the next day or two. I know this was an issue you had forwarded to my office a while back, and wanted to have a conversation with the local council. So I would not too sure whether or not the budget process is the right avenue to address this issue, but I would like to try to figure this out for you. So if you could maybe reach out to me in the next day or two, and we could sit down and try to sort something out. I think that we'll have to have a bit of a conversation about trying to sort this out.
Okay, thank
I've
you very
dealt
much,
with this issue.
Councillor.
I've dealt with this issue a few times in my own ward.
Yes, I know.
Bluffs, of course. So I think we should have a conversation about that.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John.
Thank you.
Next three speakers are Jeff Vitale, Melissa Goldstein, and Jade Armstrong. Jeff.
Hello, Chair Crawford, members of council. My name is Jeff Vitale. It's nice to see some of you up this late. It would certainly be nicer to see more members of council. I mean, not just the 27, it would be nice to see more members, but anyways. I'm currently employed as a caretaker for the Toronto District School Board, and I'm a proud member of CUPE Local 4400, Toronto Education Workers. I am here to speak to you as an individual and not as a representative of CUPE. I was born and raised in Northern Scarborough in Ward 23. I have lived in other areas of Scarborough as well, and now live in Beaches, East York. I am here to discuss and share my life experiences with you. My hope is that the programs and city initiatives that made a difference in my life growing up will continue to receive your support and the crucial funding that is needed at this difficult time. One of my fondest memories of childhood is the sports leagues that were managed by the local community association and a city-run program at the local school on Saturday mornings that was called Kids in Action. The leaders of the program were local teens who were only a few years older than us participants. Not only did us participants get to burn some energy on Saturday mornings, which I know my mother and father greatly appreciated, it created young leaders in our community. It encouraged me when I was a teenager to give back to my community by volunteering to teach a martial arts program for the city and to become a camp counselor myself. This program, Kids in Action, was at the local school instead of a community center, so all of us kids from the neighborhood could walk to the location and then home together. Without parents who drive, it is very hard for young people in Northern Scarborough to find affordable programs that interest them. Frankly, it's hard to find any programs at all sometimes. As a TDSB caretaker now, I have seen that some schools, especially large schools with pools, do have weekend recreation programs run by the city. At other schools, though, any programs I see are not city programs, but run by local community groups. I ask that the city expands recreation programs for residents of all ages and abilities by collaborating with local community groups to find ways of further using city resources, such as libraries, to provide programs in all communities. I would also regularly play volleyball at a recreation center that was a 35-minute walk from my home when I was a teenager. It gave us all a positive outlet to expend our energy while also building friendships and community. I think about fellow students when I was in high school and the lack of opportunities, programs, the lack of safe spaces, positive voices, and community support that led to so many negative outcomes later in life. I remember a young man in one of my classes who at 15 was talking about their aspirations of one day becoming a drug dealer. This young man was eventually charged and convicted of drug trafficking and robbery. I look back at that and I realize that without the programs that I took advantage of, without positive role models at schools, without the young people in my community setting a positive example when I was younger, I could have gone down a similar path.
We need programs that give hope to a large group of youth who currently feel left out, unheard, and who are suffering mental health challenges because of the pandemic. As I spoke earlier, it is very difficult for young people in Scarborough to access programs and supports when they do not own a vehicle and rely on TTC instead. The lack of rapid transit options in northern Scarborough harms all businesses and residents. I will say that schedules and wait times for buses has improved. However, I am now worried that with a reduction in operating hours across all TTC routes, as well as the massive gap in the operating budget for years to come, this progress will be completely lost. As a regular TTC user, I can attest to the fact that bus routes in Scarborough, like the 17 Birchmount, which takes essential workers to Scarborough Hospital, are constantly full. I have been on these buses in the middle of the afternoon in December, and they have been standing room only. I do not take the TTC as often as before because of an anxiety that I feel and that many people feel when they have to be in close contact with strangers in a confined space. This is not the time to reduce operating hours. This is not the time to change capacity limits from 25 to 35 people. The TTC should be increasing service to restore people's confidence in knowing that they are safe taking the TTC. This is the opportunity to reach out to other levels of government for funding that the TTC may not receive in the future, but desperately needs. This
We'll have
is
to wrap up, please.
To implement revenue tools that have been used and discussed before to make meaningful changes for transit users in Scarborough. One of the biggest things that would make a change is the dedicated priority bus lanes that have been approved as part of the Rapid TO program. I took the bus across Eglinton on Saturday to meet a gentleman in Melville to pick up college textbooks.
We'll have to wrap up, please.
These new lanes would greatly improve travel times for residents and make a real difference in their lives immediately. I ask that council funds all priority projects, including dedicated priority bus lanes in northern Scarborough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Next is Melissa Goldstein.
Good evening. My name is Melissa Goldstein, and I'm an affordable housing and homelessness advocate and policy researcher. On October 27th, City Council directed the General Manager of SSHA to develop plans to rapidly scale up the permanent housing and shelter capacity response for the 2020-2021 winter season, if required for safe physical distancing to accommodate unanticipated demand on the shelter and housing system during the pandemic. It's only January, yet today the shelter system is full and struggling with several COVID outbreaks. The Better Living Center, which was brought online for the winter, is already at 100% occupancy, and 3 of the city's 4 warming centers, which are people's last resort when it comes to accessing warmth, are also completely full. Because of the pandemic and the fact that all publicly accessible spaces are closed, this means there is literally nowhere in the city for people who aren't already in the shelter system to go to access shelter and warmth. SSHA has not indicated that they've developed plans to further scale up the system to accommodate the current or increasing demand for shelter. As they said last week, they are operating everything that's available to them right now. So in case anyone was wondering what a winter plan that can be scaled up as needed, which is how it was presented, looks like when it's implemented, this is it. SSHA has stated that 300 TCHC units will become supportive housing, but only if the province steps up with funding for the supports, and only 30 of those 300 units are to be offered to people forced to sleep outside. That's not a plan to rapidly scale up capacity to ensure that people have access to shelter. I was pretty shocked to learn during the January 20th Budget Committee meeting that SSHA not only thinks that abandoning people to fend for themselves in parks in the middle of winter is acceptable right now, but they're planning to do the same thing next winter. SSHA's plan for 2021, at a time when the shelter system is already at maximum capacity and homelessness is still increasing, is to freeze current shelter capacity and freeze funding to Streets to Homes outreach efforts and have the city effectively turn its back on everyone who it can't accommodate with the limited shelter spaces available. There's no plan for Streets to Homes workers to do anything to help people who are forced to live outside survive, besides bringing people inside, even now that there's no space inside left for them. SSHA's plan to stop investing in shelter capacity and instead spend funding that was allocated for shelters on supportive housing that won't materialize for several years means that we're going to leave even more people outside in the cold each and every year from this point forward. We are already seeing the results of this approach. parks full of tents in the middle of winter, increases in the rates of frostbite and even death, and hundreds of regular Torontonians who have taken matters into their own hands to try and keep their homeless neighbors alive by working to feed, clothe, and shelter them with volunteer labor and donated goods. The budget before you today leaves any Torontonian who ends up homeless and can't access a shelter space without anywhere to go and with their survival reliant on volunteers and local acts of charity. This is both inappropriate and unconscionable. We need publicly funded supports in place for every person without housing, including trained staff who are paid to provide support to everyone in need of housing, including those who can't access space in the shelter system. These needs are too critical to leave them to the whims of volunteers and donors, many of whom only have time right now to help because of COVID. When these people return to work and to their normal lives later this year, what will become of these people SSHA has abandoned? What's even more shocking is that in the middle of a pandemic, a homelessness crisis, and an eviction crisis, no additional funding is being proposed to prevent eviction as a way to both preserve our existing affordable housing supply and slow the increase in homelessness. There's no additional funding for the rent bank, and the budget doesn't accommodate expanding the rent bank to provide grants or funding for several months of rental arrears, or increasing the promotion of the rent bank so tenants are aware of what supports are available. The Tenant Defense Fund isn't seeing any additional funding, and there are no other funded initiatives on the table to support tenants who are being threatened with eviction. There's no increase in funding to the EPIC program either. This becomes clearly illogical when you recognize that SSHA is patting itself on the back for housing homeless people in private housing using rent supplements, while doing little to prevent people from becoming evicted from private housing and becoming homeless in the first place. The city allows people to be evicted and become homeless, allows the landlord to raise the rent on the vacated unit, and then uses rent supplements to give landlords a financial boost for housing those same people in the same apartments that are now more expensive after the lives of people who were evicted were thrown into chaos. Meanwhile, city funds continue to be spent on things like parks ambassadors, whose only role seems to be to harass homeless people and destroy their belongings. That funding should be going to supporting people who are homeless, not policing and criminalizing them. Parks ambassadors are an example of low-hanging fruit when it comes to ways that we can defund policing and invest in supporting people instead. I can only imagine the things that Toronto can do to address its affordable housing and homelessness crisis and its overdose crisis, which is also inadequately funded in this budget, if we redirected funds from the police budget, which also contributes to the harassment and abuse of homeless people, to supporting people instead of policing them.
We'll have to wrap up, please.
In closing, SSHA's proposed budget is a disgrace. Instead of a budget that sets out to realize people's right to housing and basic shelter, it represents a plan to abandon people who are at risk of losing their housing and people who have lost their housing. The 2021 budget must include the funds necessary to provide emergency shelter to every Torontonian that needs it, operate far more warming centers across the city than are currently available, expand support to people who are homeless and unable to access the space in the shelter system so that people's needs for food, basic shelter, and support are provided by trained and paid staff.
Thank you, Melissa.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
If I could, Mr. Budget Chief, Melissa, I've just got a couple of questions, and thank you. You covered a hell of a lot of ground in that 5 minutes. The support for people who can't currently access shelter services, of course, we would like to ensure, and we should be funding to ensure people have not only emergency shelters, but adequate supportive housing. But in the meantime, we seem to be in a place where we don't have that capacity and people are more comfortable and feel safer, and perhaps rightly so, given the outbreaks currently in encampments or not coming inside. Can you give any...
Just to clarify, they can't come inside. I mean, this has been a debate.
There's no space.
There is no space right now. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Can you just, the supports, because we did, at least the intent of a motion at council was to authorize SSHA staff to fund necessary supports for people that are currently sleeping outside. My understanding is that perhaps that's not rising up to what the intent of council should have had. Are there specific asks there that we could give direction to our staff to undertake in order to help people that are currently living or sleeping outside?
I think that I feel really frustrated with the situation because I agree that I think the council has given a lot of direction in the way of providing supports. I think one of the problems is that while it remains illegal for encampments, it means that the city providing support to encampments is difficult because they're encouraging an illegal activity. So this is why people have been asking for a moratorium on evictions, because then it means that SSHA can support people better without conflicting with the city's own bylaws. But that's not a budget issue, the encampment eviction issue. So as far as budget goes, I think that if there was particular activities that were costed and staff were directed to do them, so things like instead of suggesting that SSHA decide how they want to provide supports for people, they're directed to provide people with sleeping bags, provide people with tents, or to provide another target for respite sites or something like that. I mean, it's got to be specific, because if left to their own devices, it's clear that SSHA isn't actually following through with the intent of council.
Can I ask you one more question? If there's a hotel or a vacant apartment building that's available, should the city be doing everything it can to try to acquire it so people can come inside for the winter?
Yes. One of the things that was cut off from my deputation was that I think we also need to dedicate funds to a small sites rental acquisition program, and it would include buildings like that are currently at risk of being lost or are available on the market. There are a lot of buildings available on the market right now, and if we could snap them up, I think that we would not only preserve housing, but we would actually be able to provide housing for additional people.
Melissa, I know you're familiar with the Parkdale Land Trust, and fortunately, it's not public yet, but we'll have a notice of motion coming this month or next to put some money together to start a similar land trust and seed those funds for Chinatown and Kensington Market. And I hope that that will result in preserving some of these small sites so that they can remain affordable. Thanks for your hard work.
Thank you. Next three speakers, Jade Armstrong, Rachel M., and Krisan Veerasingham. Jade? Is Jade with us? Jade Armstrong. Okay, if Jade can hear us, you may have to log in again or work with clerks to try to see if we can get you on.
Mr. Chair, it's Carly with City Clerks. Jade was unable to connect to the meeting tonight.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's fine. Let me know if Jade does connect again. Next is Rachel M.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, hi there. My name is Rachel, and I'm an 18-year-old college student living in the GTA. I'm here to show my strong support for divesting from the police budget and reinvesting those funds into actual communities, specifically Black and Indigenous communities. This is widely known as defunding the police. Black Lives Matter Canada is doing so much great work advocating for this, and we should listen to them. And they've continuously said defund the police by 50% at least, which I know may sound very scary to you, but may I remind you that the policing budget is an astounding over $1 billion in Toronto alone, and $500 million is still an astounding amount of money. I know that some of you may be thinking, another person talking about racism in Toronto like the many people before me, but I would reframe that by saying, wow, so many people took time out of their day to speak about the importance of investing in communities rather than policing. It must be a very important pressing issue to Torontonians. And it is. That's why we're all here, hoping that one day you'll finally listen to us, because we will not stop until this white supremacist system that is Canada is dismantled. Yes, racism systemically exists in Canada, and it is embodied within the policing system. That's why we need to move away from this idea that police are the only people that protect us and that prevent crime, because it's simply not true. Firstly, who is the us that they protect? Because countless amounts of Black and Indigenous and disabled folks have died at the hands of police. So who are they really protecting? White, able-bodied people? Secondly, off the top of my head, I think of the special education teachers that help me with my stress levels during school, the mental health workers I've seen that help me cope with my anxiety and life struggles, the catharsis of my art classes. This protected me. This is all crime prevention, because I'm lucky to now have the tools to take care of myself and therefore the environment around me. And John Tory consistently deflects the suggestion of defunding the police by saying there's no one else to protect us. Well, this is your chance to invest in other forms of protection for everyone, including Black and Indigenous peoples. That can look like aiding homeless people, a basic income for all, giving the money to Indigenous communities that don't have access to clean water, investing in our education system so that it includes people of color in the curriculum, decriminalizing drug possession, investing in small businesses that hold cultural significance. With $500 million, there's so much you can do to help communities and protect communities, and there are organizations like Black Lives Matter Canada that have already done the work of figuring out where the money should go. And there are already organizations doing the work of aiding homeless people, for example. So for you, it's a very simple process of divesting the money from policing and giving it to communities and organizations that are actually going to protect Toronto and make Toronto a better city. Thank you for listening. And now I'd like to use the rest of my time to pose a question to all of you. Can you commit to defunding the police in the 2021 Toronto budget? And if not, what's stopping you? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your deputation. Seeing no questions, the next is Kristen Veerasingham. Sorry if I got that wrong. Kristen?
No, it's okay. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Krishan Veerasingham from Scarborough Centre, and I'm speaking today as a child of immigrants who came to Canada over 30 years ago. Immigrants who sacrificed their health and ambitions to create a home in Toronto for their 3 children. However, since I was born 26 years ago, I've lived in the same overcrowded apartment, trapped, unable to afford to move on and build my own future. I count myself lucky, however, as my home life is safe while many in my peer groups are not. Like me, a recurring theme among them is a feeling of being trapped. However, they are trapped in controlling relationships, precarious housing, and domestic violence. I can't keep track of the number of conversations with friends where they've expressed their disillusionment with their home life and future. And this isn't limited to my circle, as we have seen with COVID-19, an explosion of domestic violence cases and a worsening of the mental health crisis. I ask you to consider the invisible scars being left on society today that will manifest themselves in the future if proper action is not taken. I believe the priorities of a person says a lot about them, and the interests that members on this council prioritize will speak volumes to their constituents. I appreciate the council members who advocate for mental health and publicly support diversity, as well as Black Lives Matter and Indigenous Lives Matter. However, to me and my community, a lot of them being frontline workers like my mother, this rhetoric doesn't come to fruition as material solutions. And during COVID, a lot of them are losing faith as the other priorities seem to hold precedence to those in positions of power. Priorities that exacerbate issues people like my mother face. Now, we know affordable housing and access to housing has proven to reduce crime, empower women, and promote racial equity in study after study, report after report. Many organizations from Family Services Toronto to the Canadian Civil Liberties Association already recognize this as expressed in their recent report, Rethinking Community Safety. I ask that Council pay heed and put affordable housing ahead of the exorbitant police budget and listen more to frontline workers as opposed to the real estate vultures who prey on those that can barely afford to live in a city that should value them. Knowing all this, the budget you create will speak volumes about just where your priorities lie, and ask that you not diffuse your responsibility and prioritize the budget in accordance with your own rhetoric. As a side note, I want to echo other deputants on their concerns over overcrowded buses, as well as support whether it be a property tax, sales tax, or income tax for Toronto. Thank you for your time. I appreciate the platform given to me, and I hope you use yours wisely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Seeing no questions, we'll next go on to Alison Cervetsky. Alison, are you there? Alison Cervetsky.
Hi, Mr. Chair. It's Carly with City Clerk. I believe she is connected, but she hasn't turned on her audio.
Okay, Alison, if you can hear me, if you could maybe turn on your audio. If not, if you're having some challenges, maybe we can come back to you. Alison, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yep, great. Go ahead.
Okay, apologies for the delay. Thank you to the committee for this opportunity. And I want to start a little bit differently than I had planned, just to say thank you to Rachel and Krishan, who both spoke so eloquently and reflectively. Thank you for that. My name is Allison, and I'm a resident of Ward 9, Councillor Bilau's ward. Last spring and this fall were the first seasons in 13 years that I've not met students for weekend reading, homework, and game sessions at the Toronto Public Library. I'm a reader in the Leading to Reading program at the Parkdale branch, which is one of the 41 branches offering this program in the city. I've been privileged to witness the benefits that the TPL provides in the form of childcare, education, literacy, and extension services, like warmth and access to Wi-Fi to equity-seeking groups, including city newcomers, single parents, caregivers, and seniors. My first years volunteering with the TPL were at the Maria A. Shuka branch, which was in an adult literacy program that no longer exists. This program was defunded and then cut as early as 2011. Social service organizations that benefit children and families like the TPL are no stranger to flat funding or defunding. In addition, these services take cuts at the provincial level, an alternate source of funding for them, which for the TPL has meant millions of dollars cut between 2017 to 2019 alone. The city did not approve the TPL's open hours initiative to the level of funding and workforce originally proposed as early as 2006, which would have allowed libraries to operate and increase capabilities like the community centers and hubs that they are, a role that they've proven capable of fulfilling during the current pandemic when no less than 12 branches began operating as food banks. So as a taxpayer, a budget line that stood out to me is the annual increases allowed for the Toronto Police Services. There is an immediate and drastic change required beyond the no increase that's being proposed for 2021. 0% is overfunding when the TPS remains the single largest expense in the city's budget at an approximate 24 to 25% of what an average taxpayer would fund. This unacceptably high cost trades off the value of community support and services, given that the TPS too often provides the wrong response to meet community and resident needs. The TPS does not offer a house that's open for all. And I'm sure you've heard this, and I feel terrible for repeating it, but between 2013 to 2017, a Black person in Toronto was nearly 20 times more likely than a white person to be involved in a fatal shooting by the Toronto police. Are persons of color or persons in mental health distresses expected to know and accept that an encounter with the TPS could be at best a violent interaction captured by a body cam? Change is required, and change looks like actively taking Black Lives Matter's Toronto's demand to reallocate $530 million from the TPS toward community services and support. Defund the police, demilitarize the police, budget this money towards services that provide shelter, education, and employment supports like libraries, places that create opportunity, safety, and security for all Torontonians. To be clear, I'm asking that you defund the Toronto Police Services by 50%. In 2021 and no less. Allocate funds to community institutions that strengthen services for Black, Indigenous, racialized, low-income, equity-seeking people of Toronto. My two closing questions for the committee are, 1, what has kept you from properly funding community organizations that benefit many and are needed now more than ever in strange, unprecedented, polarizing times to benefit a monolith that protects few? And 2, how will new measures like a non-police response team for mental health calls be set up for long-term success and be made a priority without a major reallocation of funds away from the Toronto Police Services? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no questions. The next deputant, Sarah Gebrselassie, has requested interpretation with an ASL interpreter. I believe Saran is with us. Clerks, if you could just assist me with this.
Sorry for the interruption. It's Carly again with City Clerks. Unfortunately, we have not been able to get in touch with Sarah this evening.
Oh, okay. Okay. No, that's it's unfortunate. If we can, maybe we should be able to send in a written submission to us, if possible. Okay, the last three speakers tonight will be Deborah Ross, Orville Kojo Smith, and Shah Mohideen. Deborah, go ahead. Deborah Ross.
Deborah is connected to the meeting, but I believe she needs to connect her audio, please.
Okay, so Deborah, if you can hear me, if you could connect your audio. If you're having some challenges, as we've had a few times, you may have to disconnect and connect again. What I could do is we'll let you work on that again if you can hear me. We'll go to the next speaker and then I'll come back to you if you get connected. Next speaker is Orville or Kojo Smith. I'm just wondering if Orville's also having the same challenge here.
They are connected to the meeting, but do also need to connect their audio, please.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I guess Orville, you can probably do what Deborah's trying to do right now and try to get in. And why don't we go see if Shah Mohideen is here. Shah, are you there?
I believe they have disconnected from the meeting.
Okay. So why don't we try to get back to Deborah or Orville, one of the two, whoever speaks first gets to speak first. So it does look like
muted.
Sorry, who's that?
Can you hear me now?
We can. Is this Deborah?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. Great.
Okay, I will go ahead.
Okay, why don't you, you're ready to speak if you wish.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
My name is Deborah Ross. Thank you for the opportunity to present at the Budget Committee public presentations today, January 26th, 2021, Capital and Operating Budgets. I am the Operating Director of the Mexican Center for Health, Arts, Social Enterprise and Education. We are in Ward 5, York Southwestern, representing the grassroots community of people of African descent, particularly the descendants of enslaved Africans, of which Canada was a participant. This presentation is under the auspices of the International Decade for the People of African Descent and the UN's 2017 report to Canada by the Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, outlining the declining socioeconomic conditions of this population. A socioeconomic portrait of Canada's Black population released February 25th, 2020 by Statistics Canada and numerous other reports outline the declining socioeconomic conditions of Canada's Black population. Within that population are the descendants of enslaved Africans, the majority of which have African Caribbean roots. We are requesting that the capital and operating budget provide distinct, tangible investment measures for the economic advancement of the descendants of enslaved Africans in all the areas, particularly business development, to advance Toronto's collective prosperity, opportunity, and livability for this distinct population. Specifically, we are advocating for a de-emphasis on programs and services. Instead, we are strongly advocating for measurable emphasis on infrastructure development in the form of buildings and/or land to grow technology, manufacturing, construction businesses, etc., led primarily or exclusively by members of this population. These measures will help to build the trust and confidence and improve the lives of this population of Torontonians who are the descendants of enslaved Africans. I thank you very much for having me speak, and I want to thank all the other panelists here representing tonight.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for coming up tonight. Is Orville Smith connected?
Yes, sir. I am here.
Excellent, thanks. Great, Orville. You are our last speaker tonight, so begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. My name is Orville Kojo Smith. Thank you for the opportunity to present to the Budget Committee for public presentations, January 26, 2021, capital and operating budgets. I am the Executive Director of Lexemu Center for Health or Social Enterprise and Education, Ward 5, York Southwestern, and a member of the People of African Descent Grassroots Community, particularly descendants of enslaved Africans, of which Canada was a participant. This presentation of the Economic for People of African Descent and the UN's 2017 report to Canada by the Working Group of Experts and People of African Descent. On behalf of our organization, we send our condolences to families in Toronto, GTA, Canada, who are impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. It is well documented that the descendants of enslaved Africans in Toronto were in a pre-pandemic socio-economic crisis before COVID-19. The city of Toronto needs to include distinct economic measures in its operation budget to begin redressing the injuries of colonialism. This includes investment for the anti-Black racism strategy, grassroots infrastructure development to appropriately address youth mental health, chronic diseases, business development, high incarceration rate, education, youth entrepreneurship, food security, housing, and landlessness. Decolonization is the undoing of colonialism, where a nation establishes and maintains its economic dominion over one or more territories. The people of African descent economic value is about a minimum of $6 billion per year in the city of Toronto. For the city of Toronto anti-Black racism strategy to be of any meaningful purpose, its budget must provide access to economic opportunities for us to demonstrate our untapped skills and capacity to develop a distinct grassroots infrastructure that is culturally relevant, appropriate, and sustainable in our ecosystem. The city's budget needs to reflect a strong grassroots economic strategy that puts grassroots first, allowing unhindered access to operation and development resources to redress the existing deplorable socio-economic conditions of the descendants of enslaved Africans that are a result of racist economic policies enshrined in the City of Toronto policies. Mayor John Tory's recognition of the decade will be meaningless, and our expectations to achieve the goals of the Toronto Action Plan will be impossible if the City of Toronto budget fails to allocate funding in its budget for infrastructure development for the descendants of enslaved Africans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation to us, Orville. Seeing no questions, again, thank you very much for your presentation. I want to thank all the deputations over the last 2 days that have come before the Budget Committee. It's a very helpful part of the process. And again, thank you for giving your input. And members, again, thank you for coming out. I think it's the
Sorry
first.
for the interruption, Mr. Chair, but I believe we have been able to reconnect 2 of our speakers.
Oh, okay.
I do believe Saren is now on the line.
Okay,
great. That is correct. Good afternoon, members of the Budget Committee. I will be deputing in both official languages today for my Francophone base that is listening in. My name is Saron Gebrselassie, and I'm a trial lawyer specializing in major criminal matters, wrongful death, and human rights cases. And I'm here to add my support to the very talented young people in particular who called for a repurposing of the Toronto Police budget. As you already know, it is overwhelmingly low-income people that are charged with and convicted of criminal offenses in the city of Toronto. I can say with confidence that the majority of these criminal cases on my desk would not make their way there if those offenders had better opportunities at their disposal. There is no data that links excess policing to crime reduction or crime relief. If that were so, I would have been out of a job as a criminal lawyer a long time ago. Last year, City Council rejected the call to reduce the police budget. This was so even though we saw the largest peaceful protests of all time, not only in this country, but in the United States as well. As you know, the budget is over $1 billion. This is so even though we're facing a pandemic that we know is a prelude to a long recession. Right now, 1 of every 4 property tax dollars is pipelined to the police budget. That's more than goes to housing, libraries, economic development, paramedic services, arts, and culture combined. This, for me, just begs the question, how does one defend this as a prudent use of taxpayer dollars? The CCLA recently produced a report that I highly recommend you get your hands on. It's called the Rethinking Community Safety, and it shows us how we can repurpose the police budget effectively. In this report, it excavated how $100 million could be sort of repurposed towards affordable housing, mental health services, youth hubs, and more greater financial support to outreach workers and other social service type programs designed to reduce crime and designed to tackle poverty. In the city of Ottawa and their community organizations have gone even further and put together a really fascinating alternative budget that I would also highly recommend you have a look at. And it, again, shows us so many ways that of how one could limit the scope of police services and reinvest those dollars into other line items. Like thousands of Canadians have called for, I'm here to add my voice to a growing chorus calling for a reduction of the police budget. Bonjour à tous et toutes, et merci de me donner l'occasion de vous parler aujourd'hui. Je suis ici en tant qu'un expert en droit criminel, droit de la personne et droit de la mort injustifiée. Ce sont la communauté pauvre qui sont accusées et reconnues coupables de crimes. Je peux affirmer avec confiance que la majorité des crimes sont les crimes de pauvreté. Si nous voulons améliorer nos communautés, il faut réinvestir dans les communautés. Il faut réinvestir dans les logements, dans les services de santé mentale, et il faut augmenter les opportunités, les possibilités pour les jeunes. $1 sur 4 de la taxe foncière va au budget de la police. C'est plus que le budget de logement, les bibliothèques, aux arts et culture, au développement économique et aux services sociaux combinés. Nous pouvons construire une meilleure ville. L'Association canadienne de liberté civile a produit un rapport qui montre comment 340 millions de dollars peuvent être acheminés vers le logement, le développement économique, les bibliothèques, les arts, la culture et les services sociaux. À Ottawa, les organisations communautaires sont allées encore plus loin et ils ont produit un budget alternatif. Ils appellent à limiter le rôle de la police au service d'enquête et à réaffecter le reste du budget de la police aux services communautaires et à la sécurité alimentaire. Je vous demande de couper le budget de la police. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I appreciate your time with us. I believe that is everybody. Clerk's just confirming. I think we have everybody who's been with us tonight has had the opportunity.
We do have one speaker who was able to connect,
okay.
Shaw, and then we did have one additional late addition to the speaker's request, Joel Sterling, who is also connected to the meeting.
Okay, so who was the first? So I didn't hear the first name.
Shaw, I believe. The last individual in the speaker's list.
Yeah, yes. Okay, thank you. So Shaw, you welcome to the Budget Committee. Hello, Shaw. Shaw may be connected, but I don't know if the speaker would be working. Sorry, Carly, who was the last speaker again who just registered?
And then the last speaker is, I believe, Joel Sterling.
Joel, why don't we go to you if you're there, and then if Shaw does connect, we can finish off with him. So go ahead, Joel. Welcome.
I believe Joel is here, but he does need to reconnect your audio, please.
Sorry.
So is that Joel?
Yeah, it's me.
Great. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes, and welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and committee members. Some of the money that is set aside every year whenever it snows should be used to focus on some of the areas of our roads and sidewalks at and around bus and streetcar stops. I've seen some passengers having to walk on or over a big snowbank in order to get on or off the bus or streetcar, and I had to do it before. The sidewalks and roads in some locations are sometimes icy, which means there is a chance of someone slipping and falling when attempting to catch a bus or streetcar. So those areas need to be kept clean, and regardless of the location, especially areas near apartment buildings and long-term care homes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I welcome any questions.
Very much, Joe. Appreciate you coming tonight. I don't think there are any questions, and again, I appreciate you getting out to have a speak with us tonight. Is Shah Mohidin there? As I understand, Shah's connected, but we may be having problems with the speaker, the mute button as well.
I believe their audio still is not connected.
Okay. I'll try one more time with Shah. And again, Shah, if you can hear me, if we can't figure out your problem, maybe you can send in a written deputation to the committee and we'd be more than pleased to review it. Okay, so why don't we do that, members? And I do apologize to Shaw. It's always much better if you could speak to us, but it looks like we're having a few technical challenges. Anyway, first of all, let me say I want to thank everybody for coming out, as I mentioned, and committee members for coming out for the deputations over the last 2 days. It was a little different than years past where we've actually gone out to different parts of the city. I think it's the first time in the last 4 or 5 years where we've had the entire budget committee together to hear all the budget deputations. So I want to thank all of you for coming out over the last 2 days. And we'll end off with a motion to receive the public presentations. Councillor Bradford, father-to-be, with us again another day and another evening. So I assume there's no good news yet, but I'm sure that'll be coming very soon.
Worth the wait, I'm told.
Oh, it is. Don't you worry. It'll be great. We're looking forward to hearing all about the new editions. So on that, again, thank everybody for coming out. I want to thank clerks, by the way, everybody behind the scenes who I've been working with on the technological side. Has not been easy. And this is like 2 full days of deputation. So I want to thank the entire team of clerks today, this afternoon, this morning, and all yesterday. There was a whole series of them that did a phenomenal job in IT. Again, thank you. This wasn't easy to do when we're looking at the challenges with COVID, financially, otherwise, but just technically just pulling this off, and you did a great job. So thank you very much. Have a great evening, and we'll see all the budget committee members next week at the first. Thank you.